I never thought a snow fence would ruin my life, but standing in my driveway in Fargo, North Dakota, watching Karen Hartley march toward me with that clipboard pressed against her puffy coat like a shield, I knew I was about to find out exactly how wrong things could go. My name is Garrison, and I had just moved into the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision 6 months earlier. The house was perfect, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a decent yard, and the price was right. What nobody told me during the closing was that the homeowners association was run by a woman who treated the neighborhood covenants like they were the 10 Commandments carved in stone. Karen Hartley was 52 years old, divorced, and apparently had nothing better to do than patrol our streets looking for violations. Her bottle blonde hair was always pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she wore the same expression my high school principal used to wear right before handing out detention slips. "Connor," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the November wind. "We need to talk about this fence situation." I had my hands full of wooden stakes and rolls of orange plastic fencing. The hardware store receipt was still warm in my pocket. "What situation? I have not even installed it yet." She stopped about 10 feet away, maintaining what I was starting to recognize as her preferred confrontation distance. "Exactly. You need approval before installing any structures on your property." Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenants clearly states that all exterior modifications require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. "It is a snow fence," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It is temporary. It comes down in spring." "Temporary or not, it is still a structure." She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with fingers that had nails painted the color of dried blood. "You submitted no application, no site plan, no materials list. This is exactly the kind of thing that drags down property values." The wind picked up, sending a spiral of dead leaves across my driveway. I had done my research before buying the materials. Snow fences were common in North Dakota, essential even. My property sat on the western edge of the subdivision, right where it met open farmland. When the winter winds came howling across those fields, they picked up snow and dumped it wherever they hit an obstacle. Last winter, before I bought the place, the previous owner had apparently dealt with drifts that reached halfway up the garage door. My neighbor to the south, Jim Peterson, had warned me about it during one of our early conversations over the fence line. "Karen, I need this fence. Without it, I am going to have 10-foot drifts blocking my driveway all winter. I will not be able to get to work." "Then you should have thought about that before you bought a house on the edge of the development." She made a mark on her clipboard. "I am issuing you a notice of violation if you proceed with this installation without proper approval. The fine is $100 per day until the violation is corrected." My jaw dropped. $100 a day for a snow fence, for an unapproved structure, she corrected. "If you would like to submit an application, the Architectural Review Committee meets the first Tuesday of every month. We can review your proposal at the December meeting." That is almost 3 weeks away. We are supposed to get a major storm this weekend. Karen shrugged, and the gesture was so dismissive it made my blood pressure spike. "You should have planned better. Now, if you will excuse me, I have 3 other properties to inspect today." The Johnsons have let their grass go dormant without applying for a seasonal maintenance variance, and someone on Oakwood Drive has hung Christmas lights before the approved November 30th date. She turned and walked back toward her white Lexus SUV, which was parked at an angle that blocked half of my mailbox. I stood there holding the fence materials, watching her drive away, and felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the North Dakota wind. Jim Peterson came out of his house an hour later while I was still standing in my driveway, trying to decide what to do. He was in his late 60s, retired from the sugar beet processing plant, and had lived in Meadowbrook Hills since the subdivision was built 20 years ago. "Saw Karen over here," he said, walking over with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Let me guess. The snow fence. She said I need approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Said she would fine me $100 a day if I install it without permission." Jim shook his head slowly. "That woman has made more people miserable in this neighborhood than the winter weather ever could. You know the Hendersons, 3 houses down from me. They had to take her to court 2 years ago because she fined them for painting their front door navy blue instead of the approved dark blue. Spent thousands in legal fees before a judge finally told her she was being ridiculous. Why does everyone put up with her? Because fighting the HOA is expensive and exhausting, and most people just want to live their lives." He looked at the pile of snow fence materials stacked against my garage. "What are you going to do?" I looked out at the open farmland beyond the subdivision, at the endless flat expanse that stretched toward the horizon. The forecast was calling for 8 to 12 inches of snow starting Friday night, with winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour. Blizzard conditions. The kind of storm that would bury my driveway under drifts so deep I would need a front-end loader to clear it. "I guess I am going to submit an application and hope they approve it," I said, even though every instinct told me it was pointless. The Architectural Review Committee meeting was held in Karen Hartley's living room, which should have been the first red flag that the entire process was rigged. The committee consisted of 3 people: Karen herself, her friend Brenda Morrison, and a guy named Todd Chen who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I had prepared my application carefully. Site diagrams showing exactly where the snow fence would go. Photographs of similar installations in other properties around Fargo. Weather data demonstrating the prevailing wind patterns and snow accumulation predictions. A letter from a local agricultural extension agent explaining the necessity of snow fences in exposed locations. I had even included a petition signed by Jim Peterson and 4 other neighbors saying they had no objection to my fence. Karen sat in a high-backed chair that might as well have been a throne, with Brenda perched on the sofa beside her. Todd sat off to the side looking uncomfortable. I stood in the middle of the room like I was on trial. "Your application has been reviewed," Karen said, not even glancing at the thick folder I had submitted. "The committee has decided to deny your request." "Why?" I asked. "I have provided everything you asked for." "Documentation, site plans, neighbor approval. The fence would be visible from the street," Brenda interrupted. She was a thin woman with oversized glasses that made her eyes look like a startled owl. "It would create a visual eyesore that is inconsistent with the aesthetic standards of Meadowbrook Hills." "It is orange plastic and wooden stakes," I said. "It is the standard design that everyone uses. Drive down any rural road in North Dakota and you will see a dozen of them." "This is not a rural area," Karen said. "This is a planned community with standards. If we allow you to install this fence, then everyone will want to install whatever structures they please. Before you know it, we will have people putting up storage sheds and playground equipment without approval." "People should be able to put up playground equipment in their own yards," I said. Karen's expression froze. "Not without approval, they should not. This is exactly the attitude that leads to neighborhood decline. Rules exist for a reason, Mr. Garrison." I turned to Todd, who had been silent the entire time. "What do you think?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I think snow management is a practical concern that should be addressed, but I also understand the committee's concerns about maintaining standards. In other words, he was not going to help me. I looked back at Karen. When can I resubmit? You can submit a revised application for the January meeting. Perhaps if you proposed a different design, something less visible, we could reconsider. The January meeting. The winter will be half over by then. Then I suggest you find alternative snow management solutions. She stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Thank you for your time, Mr. Garrison. Brenda will show you out. I walked back to my house through the December darkness, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The temperature had already dropped to 15 degrees, and the storm was rolling in ahead of schedule. I could feel it in the wind, see it in the halo around the streetlights. The snow started falling at 3 in the morning. I woke to the sound of wind hammering against the windows, and when I looked outside, the world had disappeared into a whiteout. The storm lasted 36 hours. When it finally cleared on Sunday afternoon, I opened my garage door and found exactly what Jim Peterson had warned me about. The drift started about 20 feet from my house and extended all the way to the garage. They were 7 feet tall at the peak, sculpted by the wind into solid waves of snow that looked almost beautiful until you realized you had to move all of it to get your car out. My truck was buried up to the door handles where I had left it parked in the driveway. I spent 8 hours with a snow blower and a shovel clearing a path. My back was screaming by the time I finished, and I knew this was just the first storm of many. December through March in Fargo meant one blizzard after another, and without a snow fence to redirect the wind, every single one would deposit its load right across my driveway. Karen's house, I noticed, had minimal snow accumulation. She lived in the interior of the subdivision, protected by rows of other homes. Her driveway had maybe 6 inches of uniform coverage, the kind you could clear in 20 minutes with a snow blower. I saw her Tuesday morning as I was leaving for work. She was standing in her driveway wearing a long wool coat, watching as a professional snow removal service finished clearing her walks. She gave me a little wave, and I swear there was smugness in it. That was when I stopped feeling angry and started feeling calculating. I worked as a systems analyst for a regional bank, which meant I spent my days solving problems with data and logic. That night, I sat down at my computer and started researching. I pulled up property surveys, wind studies, meteorological data, and most importantly, the HOA covenants themselves. The document was 127 pages long, written in dense legal language that probably required a law degree to fully understand. But I read every word. Section 12, paragraph 4 did indeed require approval for structures, but the definition of structure was where things got interesting. It specified permanent or semi-permanent installations affixed to the property. The examples given were fences, sheds, pergolas, and decks. A snow fence was temporary by design. It was not affixed to anything. It was held in place by stakes driven into the ground, and it was removed entirely every spring. By the strictest interpretation of the covenant language, it might not even qualify as a structure requiring approval. But I knew Karen would never see it that way, and fighting her interpretation would mean lawyers and court dates and thousands of dollars I did not want to spend. The Hendersons had won their case about the door color, but Jim said it cost them over $5,000 in legal fees. So I took a different approach. If I could not install a snow fence to redirect the wind, then the wind would blow unobstructed across the farmland and hit my property. The snow would pile up wherever the wind decided to put it. That was just natural weather patterns. Nothing I could do about it. But snow fences did not just protect the property they were installed on. They redirected wind and snow accumulation for quite a distance downwind. Without my fence, the wind patterns would be different. Snow would drift differently, and Karen's house was directly downwind from mine. I pulled up a topographical map of the subdivision and started doing calculations. The prevailing winter wind in Fargo came from the northwest. It swept across the open farmland, hit the western edge of Meadowbrook Hills, and then swirled through the streets in predictable patterns. My property acted like a break wall, splitting the wind flow. Some of it went north, some went south, and some of it rose up and over, dropping its snow load on my driveway. But if I changed the dynamics on my property, if I did certain things that were entirely within my rights and required no HOA approval, I could change where that snow ended up. The next weekend, I went to work. I started by removing everything from my yard that might catch or redirect wind. The decorative boulders the previous owner had placed along the property line went into storage. The small ornamental fence around the garden beds came down. I even removed the bird bath and the yard art. Then I went to the garden center and bought something that required no approval whatsoever: mulch. Lots and lots of mulch. I spread it in strategic locations around my yard, creating smooth slopes instead of abrupt edges. Snow sliding off a smooth surface behaves differently than snow hitting obstacles. I also rearranged my snow removal patterns. Instead of piling the snow I cleared along the sides of my driveway, I moved it to specific locations in my yard, building small berms that would affect wind patterns. Each berm was carefully placed based on my calculations of wind direction and snow movement. None of this was technically against any rules. I was landscaping my own property. The HOA covenants said nothing about where you could pile snow on your own land, and they certainly did not prohibit spreading mulch. Jim Peterson watched me work with growing amusement. "You are up to something," he said on the second day of my project. "I am just doing some winter property management," I said innocently. "Uh-huh." He looked at the berms I was constructing. "You know anything about fluid dynamics? I might have taken a few engineering courses in college." He laughed, a deep belly laugh that made his whole frame shake. "This is going to be interesting." The next storm hit the following Thursday. Another 8 inches of snow with sustained winds of 30 miles per hour. I watched from my window as the snow fell and the wind howled. The patterns were different this time. The wind hit my property, found no obstacles, and accelerated slightly as it funneled through. The snow I had strategically piled created eddies and currents that pushed the wind flow in a slightly different direction. By Friday morning, my driveway had 3 feet of snow. Not great, but better than the 7-foot drifts from the first storm. I spent 4 hours clearing it. Karen's driveway had 5 feet of snow piled against her garage door. I was drinking coffee at my kitchen window when she came out Friday afternoon. I watched her stand there staring at the massive drift, her breath forming angry puffs in the cold air. The professional snow removal service showed up an hour later with a small front-end loader to clear it. She came to my door that evening. I had been expecting her. "Did you do something to cause this?" she demanded the moment I opened the door. No greeting, no preamble. "Cause what?" "The snow. I have never had drifts like this before. Not in 20 years of living here," I shrugged. "Weather is unpredictable. Maybe it is climate change." Her eyes narrowed. "I know you are doing something. My snow removal service said the drifts are unusual. They said it looks like the wind is being redirected from your property." "I do not control the wind, Karen." I wanted to install a snow fence to manage the drifts on my property, but someone denied my application. So now I just have to deal with natural snow accumulation like everyone else. "You removed things from your yard." I did some landscaping. That is allowed, is it not? I did not see anything in the covenants about where I can place mulch or decorative rocks. She stood there for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to find some rule I had broken, some violation she could cite. But there was nothing. I had been very careful about that. "This is not over," she finally said and turned away. Jim Peterson came over after she left. She looked mad. She got hit with some bad drifts. Bad drifts that just happened to be way worse than anything she has experienced in 2 decades. He was grinning. "Connor, you are playing with fire here. I am not doing anything wrong. I am just managing my property the best I can without the snow fence she would not let me install." "Technically true," he agreed, "but she's going to make your life hell if she figures out you are doing this deliberately." "Let her try. I have read the covenants front to back. I am not violating anything." The storms kept coming through December and into January. Fargo had one of the snowiest winters in recent memory, with a major storm system rolling through every 4 to 6 days. Each time my driveway got buried, and each time Karen's drifts were worse. By the 3rd storm, she had started taking pictures. I would see her out in the street with her phone, documenting the snow patterns, measuring drift heights. She brought in someone she claimed was a meteorologist to assess the situation. He looked at my property for about 20 minutes, then told her that snow drift patterns were complex and influenced by multiple factors, but that nothing appeared to be artificially manipulating the wind flow. Which was technically true. I was not artificially doing anything. I was just selectively removing and rearranging things on my own property in ways that happened to affect natural wind patterns. The HOA sent me a letter in mid-January demanding that I reinstall the landscaping features I had removed. I sent back a response from a lawyer friend of mine, pointing out that the covenants contained no requirements for specific landscaping features, and that property owners had full discretion over ornamental choices as long as they maintained basic upkeep standards. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting in late January. She sent out notices to everyone in the subdivision claiming there was a major issue affecting property values and resident safety. About 40 people showed up at the community center, most of them looking confused about why they were there on a Tuesday night. Karen stood at the front of the room with a presentation board covered in photos and diagrams. "We have a resident who is deliberately manipulating weather patterns to damage neighboring properties," she announced. There were murmurs of confusion from the crowd. "Connor Garrison has removed protective barriers from his property and strategically placed snow berms to redirect wind and snow accumulation toward other homes, specifically toward my home." I stood up from where I had been sitting in the back. "I removed some decorative rocks and a bird bath, Karen. I am not controlling the weather. The evidence is clear." She pointed to her photos. "Before December, my property experienced minimal snow accumulation. Since you made these changes, I have had unprecedented drifts. My snow removal costs have tripled. Maybe you should install a snow fence," someone called out. There was laughter. Karen's face turned red. "This is not a joke. He is deliberately causing property damage." "I am not causing anything," I said. I applied to install a snow fence that would have managed the wind patterns on my property. The Architectural Review Committee denied my application. So now the wind blows unobstructed, and snow falls where it falls. If that is affecting your property, maybe you should apply for approval to install protective measures of your own. More laughter rippled through the crowd. I could see people starting to connect the dots. Jim Peterson stood up. "I have a question for the HOA board. Why was Connor's snow fence application denied in the first place?" Snow fences are standard practice in North Dakota. They protect property and prevent exactly the kind of problems Karen is complaining about. Brenda Morrison, sitting next to Karen at the front table, cleared her throat. The committee felt that the fence would be aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. So you denied a practical solution to snow management because you thought it looked ugly, someone else called out. And now you are mad that he is having snow management problems. We are not mad about his problems, Karen snapped. We are concerned about the problems he is causing for others. Todd Chen, the third member of the Architectural Review Committee, raised his hand tentatively. Can I say something? I voted against denying Connor's application. I thought the snow fence was reasonable. I was outvoted 2-1. Karen whirled on him. That was a confidential committee discussion. Actually, meeting minutes are supposed to be available to all homeowners, Todd said. I checked the bylaws. We have not been publishing minutes like we are supposed to. The murmurs in the crowd got louder. I could see the momentum shifting. People were starting to realize that Karen had created this problem herself by denying my reasonable request. And now she was trying to blame me for the consequences. A woman I did not recognize stood up. I have lived here for 15 years, and I am tired of Karen blocking every reasonable request. My husband and I wanted to install a patio cover last summer. She denied it because she said it was too modern looking. We had to sit in the sun all summer. I wanted to plant different flowers than what is on the approved list, someone else said. She told me I would be fined if I did. She made me repaint my shutters because the color was half a shade off from the approved palette. The meeting devolved into a complaint session about Karen's management style. Person after person stood up with stories of denied applications, arbitrary rule enforcement, and petty fines. By the end of the night, someone had called for a vote of no confidence in the Architectural Review Committee. Karen tried to shut down the discussion, but she had lost control of the room. The vote happened, and it was not even close. 32 people voted for dissolving the current committee and forming a new one. 5 people voted against, including Karen and Brenda. I left the meeting feeling like maybe things would get better. But I should have known Karen would not go down without a fight. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Fargo. Karen was suing me for property damage, claiming that my deliberate manipulation of weather patterns had caused excessive snow accumulation on her property, resulting in damage to her roof and thousands of dollars in snow removal costs. The lawsuit was absurd on its face, but it was also expensive to defend against. I called my lawyer friend Marcus, who had helped me with the earlier HOA response. She is actually suing you for changing the weather. He sounded like he could not believe what he was reading. Apparently. Connor, this is the most ridiculous thing I have seen in 10 years of practice, and I once had a client who tried to sue his neighbor because their cat kept looking at him through the window. But the problem with ridiculous lawsuits is you still have to respond to them, and that costs money. How much money to fight this all the way through? Could be 10,000 or more, depending on how stubborn she is. And even though you will almost certainly win, you will not get your attorney fees back unless we can prove the lawsuit is frivolous, which is a high bar. I sat in my kitchen that night, looking at the lawsuit papers, and felt the anger building again. This was extortion, plain and simple. Karen could not win on the merits, but she could bleed me dry with legal fees, and she knew most people would rather settle than fight. But I was not most people. Let her take me to court, I told Marcus the next day. I want to fight this. You are sure? This is going to be expensive and stressful. I am sure, and Marcus, I want to countersue her, for harassment, for abuse of process, and for whatever else we can throw at her. He was quiet for a moment. "You are serious about this?" "Dead serious. She has been making people miserable in this neighborhood for 20 years. Someone needs to stand up to her." The lawsuit turned into the talk of Meadowbrook Hills. Everyone knew about it within a week. People started taking sides, though most of the neighborhood seemed to be on mine. Jim Peterson started a legal defense fund for me, collecting donations from other residents who were tired of Karen's behavior. We raised $4,000 in the first week. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down. She hired a meteorologist expert witness who was supposed to testify that my property modifications had indeed altered local wind patterns. She hired a structural engineer who claimed the extra snow on her roof had caused stress damage. She even tried to get the city building inspector involved, claiming I was creating a public safety hazard. The building inspector, a guy named Dave who looked tired of his job, came out in early February to look at my property. He spent about 30 minutes walking around, taking notes, and then knocked on my door. "Mr. Garrison, I have been doing this job for 12 years, and this is the weirdest complaint I have ever had to investigate. Your neighbor claims you are weaponizing snow. That is about the size of it." "Well, I have looked at everything, and I do not see any code violations. You are not blocking drainage, you are not creating safety hazards, and you are not violating any building codes. As far as the snow accumulation on her property goes, that is a civil matter between neighbors, not a city issue." He left, and Karen sent another angry letter to the HOA board, demanding they take action. But the new Architectural Review Committee, which had been formed after the vote of no confidence, was made up of more reasonable people. They approved my snow fence application in about 10 minutes during their first meeting. I installed the fence on a Saturday in mid-February. Jim Peterson came over to help me, along with 3 other neighbors. We had it up in about 2 hours. Orange plastic fencing stretched across my property line, supported by wooden stakes driven into the frozen ground. It was not pretty, but it was functional. The next storm hit the following week. When it cleared, my driveway had about 8 inches of uniform snow coverage. Easy to clear. Karen's house had even worse drifts than before, because now the wind was being redirected away from my property by the fence, and it was hitting her house with even more force. She came to my door, angrier than I had ever seen her. "You did this deliberately. You waited until the worst possible time to install that fence." "I installed it as soon as I got approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You know, the approval process you made me go through. This is going to make my lawsuit even stronger. You are admitting that you could control the snow patterns all along. I am admitting that a properly installed snow fence manages wind and snow accumulation, which is exactly what I said back in November when I first applied for approval. If you had let me install it 3 months ago, none of this would have happened." She stood there trembling with rage, and for a moment I thought she might actually hit me. Instead, she turned and stormed back to her house. The lawsuit went to depositions in March. I spent 6 hours being questioned by Karen's attorney, a slick guy in an expensive suit who tried to make it sound like I was some kind of evil genius who had masterminded an elaborate revenge plot involving weather manipulation. "Is it not true that you have a background in systems analysis and engineering?" he asked. "I work as a systems analyst. I took some engineering courses in college. So you understand fluid dynamics, wind patterns, and aerodynamics. Basic concepts, sure. And is it not true that you deliberately removed landscaping features from your property after Miss Hartley denied your snow fence application?" "I removed some decorative items and did some landscaping. That is not against any rules." "But you knew that removing these items would affect wind patterns." I knew that wind generally flows more smoothly over surfaces without obstacles. That is basic physics, not some elaborate scheme. And you strategically placed snow berms in locations that would redirect wind toward Miss Hartley's property. I piled snow in my yard after clearing my driveway. Where else was I supposed to put it? It went on like that for hours. Karen's attorney was good, but he could not get around the fundamental problem with their case. I had not actually done anything wrong. I had made legal modifications to my own property. I had not violated any HOA rules, and even if my actions had affected snow accumulation on Karen's property, that was not illegal. Weather patterns affected by landscape features were a natural consequence of property ownership. Karen's deposition was apparently a disaster. Marcus told me she had gotten emotional and defensive, and had admitted under questioning that she had denied my snow fence application primarily because she did not like me challenging her authority. That was gold for our harassment countersuit. The meteorologist expert witness turned out to be a guy who taught high school earth science and did occasional consulting work. Under deposition, he admitted that while my property modifications had probably affected local wind patterns to some degree, quantifying that effect was nearly impossible. Wind and snow behavior was influenced by dozens of variables, and isolating the impact of my specific actions was pure speculation. The structural engineer had to admit that Karen's roof had no actual damage, just stress from snow load that was well within normal design parameters for North Dakota construction. By April, as the snow was finally melting and spring was showing the first tentative signs of arrival, Karen's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss their own lawsuit. They had clearly advised her that she was going to lose, and lose badly. But Marcus was not about to let her off that easy. We pressed forward with the countersuit for harassment and abuse of process. We documented 20 years of complaints from neighborhood residents about Karen's arbitrary rule enforcement. We showed a pattern of denied applications for reasonable requests. We demonstrated that she had used the HOA as her personal fiefdom, and that she had filed a frivolous lawsuit in an attempt to bully me into submission when she lost control of the situation. The HOA board, now run by reasonable people, voted to remove Karen as president and bar her from serving on any committees. They also voted to pay for part of my legal defense from HOA funds, recognizing that Karen had been acting beyond her authority and had created liability for the organization. Karen's attorney called Marcus in May with a settlement offer. She would drop her lawsuit with prejudice, pay $15,000 toward my legal fees, and resign from all HOA positions permanently. In exchange, we would drop the countersuit and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. "What do you think?" Marcus asked me. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to take her all the way to trial, to get a judgment against her and make her pay for 20 years of making people miserable. But another part of me was just tired. The whole thing had consumed 6 months of my life. I wanted it to be over. "Take the settlement," I said, "but I want one more thing. I want her to send a letter to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills apologizing for her behavior as HOA president." Marcus negotiated, and Karen agreed. The letter went out in June, a brief and obviously lawyer-written apology that probably killed her to sign. But it was something. The snow fence came down in late April, as soon as the ground thawed enough to pull the stakes. I stored it in my garage, ready for next winter. The new Architectural Review Committee had made it clear that I had a standing approval to reinstall it every fall. Jim Peterson had a cookout in May to celebrate the end of winter and the end of Karen's reign of terror. Half the neighborhood showed up. People were laughing and relaxed in a way I had not seen before. Someone brought a cake with "Freedom from Karen" written in icing, which was probably taking things too far, but everyone laughed anyway. Karen's house went up for sale in June. She moved out in July, and the rumor was she had relocated to Arizona. Good riddance, as far as I was concerned. The house sold to a young couple with 2 kids. They came over to introduce themselves the day they moved in. Their names were Michael and Sarah, and their kids immediately started playing in the yard, laughing and running around without any concern for whether they were violating some arbitrary rule. The previous owner left us a very detailed list of HOA regulations, Michael said, holding up a thick binder. Is it really this strict around here? It used to be, I said, but we made some changes. The HOA is much more reasonable now. You should come to the next meeting if you want to get involved. Are you on the board? No, but I am on the Architectural Review Committee now. We try to approve things if they are reasonable and not going to hurt anyone. Novel concept, I know. Sarah laughed. That sounds great. We were worried after reading all those rules. Our last neighborhood did not even have an HOA. Well, HOAs can work well if they are run by reasonable people who remember they are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it like dictators. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm as summer turned to fall. I dated a woman named Jennifer who worked at the bank with me. We went to movies, had dinners, and did normal relationship things that did not involve lawsuits or snow drift calculations. It was nice. The leaves changed color in October, and by November the first frost warnings were going out. I pulled the snow fence out of my garage and installed it on a cool Saturday morning. This time, there was no drama, no clipboard-wielding HOA president demanding to see permits, no threats of daily fines. Just me, putting up a simple barrier to manage snow accumulation on my property, like thousands of other people across North Dakota were doing. Jim came over while I was working. Looks good, he said. Ready for another winter, as ready as I will ever be. Forecast is calling for above average snowfall again this year. At least this time you will not be spending half your energy fighting Karen. He paused, then added, You know, what you did was pretty brilliant, malicious compliance at its finest. I have no idea what you are talking about. I was just managing my property the best I could within the constraints I was given. He grinned. Sure you were. You know the best part. You taught this whole neighborhood something important. You showed everyone that bullies lose when people stand up to them. Half a dozen applications got submitted this year that people were too scared to submit before. Playground equipment, patios, garden sheds, all approved. This place is starting to feel like a real neighborhood instead of a prison. That was the point. HOAs should make neighborhoods better, not worse. The first major snowstorm hit in mid-November, almost exactly a year after my original confrontation with Karen. I watched the snow fall from my kitchen window, drinking coffee and feeling relaxed. The wind howled across the farmland and hit my snow fence, which redirected it up and over my property. My driveway accumulated about 6 inches of uniform coverage. I cleared it in 30 minutes with the snow blower. The new neighbors, Michael and Sarah, came out to clear their driveway at the same time. Their kids were throwing snowballs and building a snowman in the front yard, something that would have earned a violation notice from Karen for creating visual clutter. Is it always this beautiful? Sarah called over to me. I looked around at the subdivision, at the snow-covered houses and the kids playing and the neighbors helping each other clear walks. At the community, that was finally starting to act like a community instead of a collection of people too afraid of fines to enjoy their own homes. It is getting there, I said. That winter was actually easier than the previous one, despite getting even more snow. My fence worked perfectly, managing the wind and keeping drifts off my driveway. My snow removal costs dropped to almost nothing. And most importantly, I was not spending every other day dealing with HOA complaints or lawsuit depositions. Jennifer and I got serious around the holidays. She moved in with me in February, and we started talking about getting married. She had never experienced the drama with Karen firsthand, but she heard all the stories from me and the neighbors. "I cannot believe you managed to weaponize snow," she said one evening while we were making dinner. "That is the most North Dakota revenge story I have ever heard. I did not weaponize anything. I just removed some obstacles and let nature take its course." "Uh-huh. You deliberately let snow pile up on her house for an entire winter because she would not let you install a fence." "When you put it that way, it sounds petty." It was petty. It was also brilliant, justified, and exactly what she deserved. Jennifer kissed me. "You stood up to a bully and won. I am proud of you." The HOA continued to function smoothly under new leadership. Property values in Meadowbrook Hills actually went up, possibly because people were not terrified of living under an arbitrary dictator anymore. Applications got approved at a reasonable rate. People fixed up their houses and yards without fear of violation notices. The neighborhood newsletter, which under Karen's leadership had been mostly a list of violations and warnings, became an actual community bulletin with events and neighbor spotlights. I ran into Brenda Morrison, Karen's former friend and co-conspirator on the Architectural Review Committee, at the grocery store in March. She looked embarrassed when she saw me. "Connor, I just want to say I am sorry," she said. "For everything. I should have stood up to Karen years ago. I let her push me around because it was easier than fighting her, and I helped her make a lot of people miserable. That was wrong." "We all make mistakes," I said. "What matters is learning from them." "I voted against you on the snow fence because Karen told me to, not because I actually thought it was a bad idea. I knew it was reasonable. I was just afraid of making her angry." She paused. "She made everyone afraid. It took you standing up to her to show the rest of us that we could push back." "Is that why you are on the new Architectural Review Committee now?" She nodded. "I wanted to do better, to actually help people instead of blocking them. I am trying to make up for the years I spent enabling her." "Good for you," I said, and I meant it. Spring came eventually, as it always does in North Dakota. The snow melted, the snow fence came down, and life moved on. Jennifer and I got engaged in May. We planned a small wedding for the fall, right there in the neighborhood in Jim Peterson's big backyard. The wedding happened on a perfect October day, with golden leaves falling and the air crisp but not yet cold. Most of the neighborhood came. People who had been strangers a year earlier were now friends. They brought food, they helped set up, and they celebrated with us late into the evening. Jim Peterson gave a toast to Connor and Jennifer, and to standing up for what is right even when it is hard. Connor came to this neighborhood last year, and he could have just gone along with the way things were. He could have accepted Karen's decision about the snow fence and suffered through a miserable winter. Instead, he found a creative solution. He stood his ground when she tried to bully him, and he showed all of us that we did not have to accept unreasonable rules from unreasonable people. He made this neighborhood better, and I am proud to call him my friend. Everyone cheered, and I felt Jennifer squeeze my hand. Later that night, after most of the guests had left and we were cleaning up, I stood in Jim's backyard looking at the houses of Meadowbrook Hills. Lights glowed in windows. I could hear laughter from a few doors down where some people were still celebrating. Someone's dog was barking happily. It looked like a normal neighborhood, which was exactly what it should have been all along. "What are you thinking about?" Jennifer asked, coming up beside me. Just that a year ago, I was ready to hate this place. One person had made it so toxic that I was already thinking about selling and moving somewhere else. And now I cannot imagine living anywhere else. Because you fixed it. Because everyone fixed it together. I just gave them a reason to. We went home to the house that had been the center of so much drama, but it was just a house now, not a battleground. My house, where I could install a snow fence in the fall and take it down in the spring. Where I could pile snow wherever I needed to in my own yard. Where I could paint my door whatever color I wanted and plant whatever flowers struck my fancy. Where I could just live without someone hovering over me with a clipboard, looking for violations. The new owners of Karen's old house, Michael and Sarah, turned out to be great neighbors. Their kids played in the yard without restriction. They installed a swing set in the spring without drama. They painted their shutters a slightly different shade and nobody cared. That fall, I installed my snow fence again. Year 2. It went up easily, and I felt a sense of satisfaction watching it stand there against the horizon. A simple barrier of orange plastic and wooden stakes. Nothing fancy, just practical protection against the wind and snow. When the first storm hit in November, I watched the snow swirl and drift, watched my fence redirect the wind, watched my driveway stay mostly clear. And I thought about how sometimes the smallest acts of resistance against unreasonable authority can change everything. Karen had tried to control every aspect of neighborhood life through fear and fines and arbitrary rules. She had made people miserable for 20 years. And all it took to end her reign was one person refusing to back down, one lawsuit she could not win, and one winter of watching snow pile up against her house while she realized she had created her own problem. I never regretted letting the wind pile those drifts against her house. Not for a second. She tried to use her power to make my life difficult, and I responded by following every rule to the letter while using the natural consequences of her own decisions against her. It was not revenge, it was justice. And justice, it turned out, felt pretty good. The neighborhood thrived in the years that followed. Property values continued to rise. New families moved in and were welcomed without fear. The HOA became what it was supposed to be. An organization that maintained common areas and protected property values without turning into an authoritarian regime. I served on the Architectural Review Committee for 3 years, approving reasonable requests and denying only the truly problematic ones. I helped rewrite the covenant language to be clearer and more fair. I worked with other board members to create appeal processes so that no one person could arbitrarily block applications. We became the model for how an HOA should operate. Other subdivisions in Fargo started asking us for advice. People wanted to know how we had transformed from one of the most restrictive neighborhoods in the city to one of the most livable. The answer was always the same. Treat people with respect, make decisions based on reason rather than power, and remember that the rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. And every fall when I installed my snow fence, I thought about Karen. About how one person's need for control had created so much misery. About how her inability to accept reasonable compromises had ultimately destroyed her position and reputation. About how she had moved away from a neighborhood she had lived in for 20 years because she could not handle being just another resident without power. I wondered sometimes if she had learned anything from the experience. If she had realized that leadership is supposed to be about service, not authority. If she understood that the reason everyone had turned against her was not because of me, but because of 20 years of her own behavior finally catching up to her. Probably not. People like Karen rarely learn. They just find new places to be tyrants, new people to control. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem was making sure my snow fence stakes were driven deep enough to withstand 40-mile-per-hour winds. My problem was planning Jennifer's birthday party. My problem was deciding whether to repaint the garage before winter. Normal problems. Good problems. The kind of problems you should have when you own a home in a normal neighborhood. And every time I looked at that snow fence standing against the North Dakota sky, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had stood my ground. Grateful that I had found a creative solution within the rules. Grateful that I had helped create change not just for myself but for everyone. The snow would come again. It always did in North Dakota. The wind would howl across the farmland, carrying winter with it. But my fence would stand, redirecting the wind, protecting my property, doing exactly what it was designed to do. And somewhere in Arizona, I imagined Karen was dealing with different problems. Maybe a different HOA. Maybe different neighbors who would not put up with her nonsense. Maybe she was learning that the rest of the world did not revolve around her need for control. Or maybe she was still the same person, just making different people miserable in a warmer climate. Either way, it was not my concern. I had my own life to live in my own house, in a neighborhood that had finally learned what community really meant. And every winter, when the snow piled up right where I wanted it to and stayed away from where I did not, I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Because sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well, following the rules, and letting natural consequences teach the lessons that words never could. The snow fence stood. The neighborhood thrived, and life went on better than before. That was enough.